listening to the Labor Notes podcast, the weekly show from Labor Notes on rank and file news and organizing tactics. I'm your pod co-host, Danielle Smith, and an organizer on our training team.
And I'm pod co-host, Natascha Elena Uhlmann. We are back today in the Stewards Corner, which I think we described last time as a mindset more than an actual location.
Yeah, and it's also a regular long-running column in the Labor Notes magazine since the 1980s, where stewards and organizers describe strategies to build better connections on the shop floor, to defend against discipline, of course, and to build power to enforce the contract, and keep fighting for more. Even if you aren't a steward, don't miss this one.
Yeah, the Stewards Corner will be a recurring theme on the podcast, so you can look forward to more resources on here. We have our coworker, Joe DeManuelle-Hall, back again today to talk about a Stewards Corner article with evergreen advice on designing more effective meetings with union members.
Joe is also on our training team and leads many of our stewards workshops. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, good to be back.
So, meetings are such a fundamental part of organizing, but it's a thing that people often feel fatigued about, which makes sense because, honestly, I think most meetings are bad.
Really? I love when meetings draw on for hours with no agenda or sense of purpose.
Who doesn't? But seriously, I think it's important for us as stewards and organizers to realize that meetings don't have to suck. We can structure them in a way that activates members and brings them closer to the project, rather than wearing them down. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but Joe, I'll throw it to you first to start us off. What sort of things do you think hold us back from having meetings that actually feel energizing to members?
So one of the common complaints that you hear from frustrated stewards or from any union activist really is no one is coming to meetings. This often leads people down the path of blaming members, saying that people are apathetic. And it makes people feel like they're failing at something central to having a strong union. But most union meetings are, frankly, pretty dry and ineffective. To an outsider, the agenda looks more or less the same every month, and it seems like the usual suspects show up to either pat themselves on the back or to fight about the same fights that they've maybe been having for years. And that's not even talking about situations where people get shut down every time they bring something up or shut out of meetings in one way or another. If you're facing those issues, you have a different kind of problem on your hands. I'd recommend checking out our article on what to do when your union leaders break your heart and the monthly workshop we do with the same name. But about meetings in general, for many members, it's unclear why it matters that they participate in particular, even if they care about the union or an issue at work. The union meeting doesn't necessarily seem like a place where things get done, and they're not always wrong. So the problem, I think, has two solutions. Meetings need to be better, and we can't rely on them as much as we do.
So how can we make our meetings more effective?
One thing I think about a lot is this article written by Joe Fahey, a retired Teamsters local president and a longtime labor educator, called Bringing the Union Meeting to the Members, that we ran in 2017. You can find it on our website, labornotes.org. It's one of my favorites. In the piece, the other Joe does a great job of covering how the issue might be less about members not caring and more about missing opportunities to get information to and from members in other ways. He gives the example of a coworker who asks you what happened at the union meeting yesterday. One response is to be dismissive. Tell them, you should have been there. But another response is to see that this coworker is expressing interest, and that presents an opportunity. How can you get the important information from the meeting back to the workplace? Can this coworker help you get the word out? This solution is less about the means, having people attend a traditional union meeting at the union hall outside of work, and is more about the ends. That is, keeping people informed and engaged and hearing about issues at work and what people want to do about them.
Yeah, Joe Fahey identifies a reality common in units, or for that matter, any other social or membership organization, as he says, which is that the most active and engaged organizers tend to be a small fraction of the people in it. But that's just a case for why we need to figure out a way to connect to folks who aren't showing up. What are some creative ways in your experience to do that?
In the article, Joe suggests striking a bargain with that coworker to share information about the meeting and ask if they'll pass it along to a couple more coworkers. One thing that I've done is bring mini meetings into the workplace, especially around particular topics that people care about, like, say, updates around a big group grievance or about bargaining. You can make an informational flyer, talk to people in the break room on their lunch break, or before work in the parking lot. You want to get people asking questions, maybe talking about different issues entirely. It lowers the barrier to participation in meetings and means that you can catch people who you might not otherwise catch. People who might not come to a union meeting, but people who still care enough to talk about something.
Danielle, you said earlier that you had some thoughts on this, and you've also run a workshop on holding effective meetings. What are some of the things you cover?
Yeah, so I've worked on this training with Joe, our labor notes Joe, and labor organizer Lena Solo, and a lot of the workshop allows people to draw on their own experience with meetings, both good and bad, to work through some of those challenges Joe just talked about. But we also offer some tips for facilitation, which seems to be one of the areas people find more challenging. Like, what do you do when no one is speaking up at the meeting? What do you do when one person is speaking up too much at the meeting? How do you bring people together in a way that lets them work and plan and drive the union forward together? One of our tips is about making room for real discussion, trying to hear from as many people in the room as possible, which might mean explicitly saying you want to hear from folks who haven't spoken yet, or calling on people. Having people talk in breakout groups or pairs is a great way to get to hear ideas from more people. This also might mean having to redirect someone who has spoken up a lot or, and it's happened to all of us, is going on a little bit too long. We actually have people practice jumping in and telling someone, hey, sorry, we've got to move to the next agenda item. Let's follow up more on your point later. We also like to tell people to be real and read the room. Like, even in that example I just gave, if someone is going on about a topic and you feel like you need to get to the next part of the agenda, but everyone else in the room really wants to talk about that topic, you might want to consider adjusting the agenda. And in terms of being real, it's okay to say in a meeting, oh, management did this crazy thing 30 minutes before our meeting. Maybe this agenda we have planned doesn't make sense anymore. Or to acknowledge that people are tired or upset or that the vibes are off for some reason or other and it might be impacting the meeting. At the end of the day, facilitation is a skill and it's something you'll get better at with practice. Preparation and thoughtfulness go a long way. People feel good when they feel like the meeting has a purpose beyond just complaining or dumping information and that their ideas are valued. Keeping that in mind will help guide you as a facilitator.
And none of the workshop tips are to have a 3-hour meeting where only the facilitator talks?
Surprisingly, no. Now, Natascha, I have a question for you. Fahey talks about preparing and sending out volunteers to reach members who are less plugged in or generally unavailable, and he talks about some criteria for identifying those volunteers, who he calls the trusteds. Why do you think it's so important to strategically delegate this kind of task to those folks?
You know, I got some really good advice from a mentor a few years back. He said, you can't care 1,000 times more than everyone else in the union. Naturally, you're going to care at least a little, maybe a lot more if you're the sort of person who is listening to this podcast. But if you're taking on every possible task alone, that's not strengthening the union. That's solidifying it in people's minds as this machine that we put dues money into that does stuff for us in exchange. Now, I'm throwing it back to you guys. We also talk quite a bit about meetings in Secrets of a Successful Organizer, a core labor notes text. If you haven't read it, what are you even doing with your life? And something that comes up there is this idea that meetings shouldn't just be structured to convey information like sort of an FAQ. And I think that speaks to a basic premise that in a union, a meeting is fundamentally an organizing space. It's not just meant to be an opportunity for core organizers to fire off a bunch of facts at their coworkers and then sort of take the temperature in the room. Or we're still in a large meeting where folks in the outer ring of the organizing bullseye, those who are hostile to the union or really averse to anything they see as going against management, may be present. There's a risk that the meeting becomes a disempowering space to air fears or skepticism without much thought to moving members past that. How do you structure a meeting as an organizing space that helps members feel and build their strength around issues they care about, instead of a debate space that ends up being about focusing on fears?
I think it's a matter of balance. If there's a union meeting and people are showing up, somebody is probably going to blow off steam. And I don't think this is bad in and of itself. It's what you do with it that really matters here. If people attending the meeting bring up issues, it's on the people running the meeting to turn that into action, to let people get out some anger, some fears, and then pivot to what are we going to do about it? What are some initial tasks to tackle that problem, and who can take them on? The frustrating part comes if nothing happens with all of the issues that people bring up. This is the part that feels disempowering and can get meetings stuck in a cycle of negativity.
I think there's also a certain level of trust you need to have with your coworkers. They have the ability to take on the work of the union and figure out what you all should do together to push for the things you need. Structure meetings in a way where they're given the relevant information and can understand it and have real input on what to do about it. Don't throw them in the deep end, but give them the opportunity to build up their organizing muscles. Well, Natascha, Joe, I think this has been an effective meeting. Anything else people should know?
Sign up for the Stewards newsletter. We link to resources and labor notes training for stewards, and it's a great way to keep up. You can email Danielle at labornotes.org to sign up.
Thanks for joining us, Joe. Well, I hope you enjoyed your stay in the Stewards Corner. That's our show. Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Natascha Elena Uhlmann, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by Labor Notes Labor Climate Organizer Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.